Sorry. Okay, so welcome everyone to our Young Graduate Seminar. And today is also our last project for the Comparative Literature course. And there are altogether 4 speakers for today's seminar. And the Q&A session will be at the end of the seminar after the 4th speaker's speech. So first, let's welcome Sun Caihong for her speech on Bildung's romance narrative and socialization, comparative analysis of the Valley of the Amazement and the course worship. Caihong, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Wang He. Good afternoon, everyone. My title today is Bildungsroman Narrative and Socialization, comparative analysis of the the Valley of Amazement and the corpse worship. A classical Bildungsroman is usually about the protagonist's process of development and socialization. According to Franco Moratti, a classical Bildungsroman usually ends with the protagonist's marriage. And then according to Goben, in classical Bildungsroman, a classical Bildungsroman usually requires the protagonist to achieve social fulfillment. This social fulfillment can be professional success, financial success, or social integration. The 2 novels I chose today are about the psychological development and the socialization of the protagonists. However, the corpse worship ends with the protagonist unwillingly accepting a job that brings him nightmares and insomnia. He's not being able to get married and thus harms the metaphor of social contract, while Wallet, with the heroine of the Valley of Amazement, does attain her social fulfillment and get married, even though she went through a very tragic life. Then, in that sense, according to Moretti and Goben's theory, Violet is able to reach the closure or the fulfillment of individual aspirations from the Bildungsroman perspective. Then this presentation will use 2 Bildungsroman to discuss the extent they adhere to this definition of classical Bildungsroman. The first novel, The Valley of Amazement, actually was written by Chinese-American writer Amy Tan. It is about the growing process of a Chinese-American mixed-blood girl in the patriarchal society in Shanghai, China, from 1905 to 1926. When Violet was young, she was kidnapped. She was kidnapped and become a prostitute, thus beginning her journey of socialization. At first, she struggles to depend on men and marry men of higher social status, but at the end of the novel, she realized that only by depending on herself can she gain a social status. Then she makes use of her advantage of a bicultural background and becomes a translator. Not long after she creates value for the society, everything is fulfilled. She gets married with her boys, finds her long-lost daughter, and reconciles with her mother. The second novel is The Corpse Washer. This novel was written by an Iraqi writer, Sinem Antoun. Set in Iraq during the Gulf War, it is about Jawad's painful maturation in the war environment. When Jawad was still an adolescent, he liked painting and wanted to be an artist in the future, but his father wanted him to inherit the family profession as a corpse washer. Fighting against his father's disapproval, he learned art and became an art teacher and painter after graduation. But soon he lost his job and couldn't support himself. The story ends with Jawad doing a job as a corpse washer painfully. Though Jawad has understood the meaning of becoming a corpse washer and shouldered his social responsibility, he still suffers from touching and washing corpses piled up by the war. Jawad had 2 lovers, but he was rejected the possibility of getting married. So these 2 novels are both these novels are about the protagonist's process of growing up and socialization. Then I will come to my conceptual framework. Bildungsroman is a German word including 2 parts. Roman means novel, while Bildung means growth, development, or education. Thus, a Bildungsroman is a novel about a young person's process of growing up. According to Franco Moretti, the classical Bildungsroman is different from the non-classical ones in their plots. The classical Bildungsroman usually has a definitive ending, the happy ending, and the non-classical Bildungsroman is marked by an open ending. The representatives of the classical Bildungsroman are Goethe's Wilhelm Meister, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, and Charles Dickens' David Copperfield, all with happy endings. And then socialization is a protagonist stepping into the society and his or her interaction with society. At the beginning of a Bildungsroman, when the protagonist step into the society, the aspiration of the individual contradict with the social demand. After experiencing a lot and going through hardships, at the end of the classical Bildungsroman, the individual will eventually come to an agreement with society. But a non-classical Bildungsroman never achieves an agreement between the individual and the society. So a classical Bildungsroman differs from a non-classical one in that the socialization of the protagonist ends up with social fulfillment and sacred marriage. According to Goben, a classical Bildungsroman usually ends with the protagonist's social fulfillment. This social fulfillment can be social integration, professional success, or financial success. But as choosing and pursuing a profession is a common and obvious theme of both novels, I will mainly focus on whether the protagonist achieves professional success at the end of the novel. This can prove whether the protagonist achieves his or her social fulfillment at the end. And according to Franco Moretti, marriage is a metaphor for the social contract. So ending with a marriage symbolizes that the individual has come to an agreement with the society and attained his or her maturity. I will analyze the protagonist's socialization from two aspects. Whether they have come to an agreement with the society and whether they have achieved social fulfillment and whether they have achieved social fulfillment and the sacred marriage, to see whether the novels follow or challenge the rules of the classical wilderness romance. Then we come to the comparative analysis of the two novels. Firstly, we will talk about the similarity. In both novels, the protagonist's socialization begins with the confrontation between the individual and the social authority, and ends with an agreement with them. But there is also a difference here in the value of amazement. The agreement is based on the concession from both sides, both the individual and the society. At the beginning of the novel, according to the norms of the patriarchal society, a mixed blood girl without the protection of parents cannot be accepted as a decent member of the society. And she is also denied any opportunity to do a decent job. But at the end of the novel, there is a concession from the side of the society. As long as that girl can work hard and depend on herself, she can be given an opportunity to do a decent job. As long as she creates value for the society, she can be accepted as a wife and also an accepted member of the society. And Violet's concession lies that she no longer insists on depending on the man to get social status. But in the corpse washer, the agreement between the individual and the society is characterized by the compromise from Jawa's side owning. So, though Jawa doesn't like washing corpses at all, though the job brings him nightmares and insomnia, he can only accept it. He is totally denied opportunity to pursue his art career. The social authority never concedes a little because the social context is so severe and so overwhelming. Then we come to the differences. I will analyze the differences from two aspects, profession and marriage. In the Valley of Amazement, Violet's socialization begins as a prostitute and ends as a successful translator. This signifies that she has attained her professional success and social fulfillment. In the corpse washer, Jaz's ideal job is being an artist and sculptor, but he doesn't end up doing this job. At the end of the novel, she becomes a corpse washer, a job that the society wants him to do and a job that brings him pain. the war and embargo makes this job unnecessary. Then I conclude that Jawa hasn't achieved his social fulfillment. This is the first difference. Then the second difference is about marriage. In the Valley of Amazement, at first, Violet is rejected by several men as a marriage partner, but at last, she indeed got married with her former patron and current boss, who rejected marrying her for several times. Her marriage is a metaphor of social contract, symbolizing her agreement with the society. And in the corpse washer, Jawar had two lovers but no marriage. I contend that his marriage is made impossible by the war. And then I will show you some evidence. I have cited two paragraphs from the novel to show that it is the war context that makes Jawar's marriage impossible. Jawar's first lover is Ring. The first paragraph is written from Ring to Jawar after her disappearance. She said, "Please forgive me, forgive my absence and sudden departure and my not telling you anything." She left Java and never appeared again because she had got cancer in her breast. And this cancer, okay, we can see here that this cancer might be the depleted uranium used in the ordnance in 1991. So it is the weapons used in the war that brought cancer to Rim and led to her disappearance. So I conclude that the war made Java and Rim's marriage impossible. And the second paragraph is what Java thought after his second lover, Gahedar, proposed marriage to him. He said, all I knew was that I was tired of myself and of everything around you. But I was dreamed I was not material for marriage or family. Here, Jawar was tired and dreamed by witnessing death and by washing corpses brought by the war. So he no longer had the ability to love and marry. So I conclude here that the war and the corpse dreamed him and made his marriage with Gahedar impossible. So after this detailed analysis, I come to this conclusion. Both novels depict the growth and the socialization of protagonists, and both protagonists finally come to terms with the social authority, which makes the novel fall into the category of the classical Bildungsroman, but set in different social background. They have differences with their respective implications. Amy Tam adhered to the norms of the classical Bildungsroman by ending the socialization with social fulfillment and marriage, symbolizing the protagonist's contract with the society, while Sina Antum challenged the norms by concluding the novel with Jawar's impossibility of getting married, caused by the war and no social fulfillment implicated by his accepting a job he doesn't like and which brings pain to him. Then by following the rules of the classical Bildungsroman, Amy Tam expressed her wish that a bicultural female can also be treated fairly and be accepted by the mainstream society by making efforts and creating value for the society. Well, by challenging the norms of the Bildungsroman, Sinan and Tum demonstrated that the war suffocated the individual aspiration and brought devastating results to the young and their growth. He also showed that under the background of war, an individual's power is too small that he or she cannot resist the demand of the social authorities. Okay, that's all for my presentation. Thanks for listening. And then let's welcome Zhou Jianhua with her presentation entitled Identity Re-establishment in Crisis Narratives Across Time and Space.
Okay, next, let's share my screen and to present the my research. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very delighted to be here to have the opportunity of making this presentation. My topic today is identity reestablishment in crisis narratives across time and space. This presentation is divided into 5 parts. Firstly, a brief introduction. Secondly, the overview of the 2 novels. Thirdly, the research methodology and the framework, and then a detailed analysis. Finally, a natural conclusion. Now, let's begin with the introduction of my research, focusing on the crisis narratives. Crisis narratives hold a rather significant place in literature as they explore the human experience in time of adversity, upheaval, and uncertainty. Crisis narrative, according to Matthew W.S. and Timson L. Snow 2016, refer to stories about tragic events, narrative that follow a crisis and their tremendous impact, including account of blame stories of renewal, victim narratives, heroic tales, and memories, which become the fundamental to how we understand a disaster, determine what should be done about it, and carry forward our lesson learned. Crisis narrative often depict characters who are confronted with profound challenges that disrupt their sense of self. So understanding how individuals navigate this crisis and reestablish their identity is crucial for comprehending the complexity of human existence. This comparative study aimed to analyze the process of identity reestablishment in crisis narrative across different temporal and spatial contexts, focusing on 2 important literary work. One is Sinan Anton's The Corpus Worship and Wiki Wang's John S.O.K. The Corpus Worship is set in war-torn Iraq, where the protagonist Jawad grappled with the destructive consequence of the Iraqi war on her his personal and cultural identity. In contrast, Jones OK explore the experience of a young Chinese immigrant woman in the United States who confronted the challenge of Chinese hate and his sense of displacement during the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. By examining these two crisis narratives, one is about man-made crisis, war crisis. The other is mainly about nature crisis, pandemic crisis. We seek to understand how different crisis narratives affect the characters, shaping and reshaping their identity. Through this exploration, we aim to contribute to a deep understanding of the intricate process involved in reshaping identity in face of crisis. Then I will move to the overview of the two novels. The first novel is Sinon Anton's The Copper's Worship. Sinon Anton is the Iraqi-born poet and novelist. The Copper's Worship is his second novel with the crisis of the Persian Gulf War as the background, which was recognized with lots of literature and translation prizes. The Copper's Worship provides an exploration of identity crisis amidst the backdrop of Iraqi war, based on the fate of an ordinary family in Baghdad. The novel depicts the disaster and trauma brought by the Iraqi war to the Iraqi. And from the first-person narrative point of view, the novel tells the story of Jawad, an Iraqi in his 20s, struggling between carrying on his family tradition career and pursuing his personal dream as a sculptor. As the bloc and Iraqi war led to Iraqi economic collapse, political chaos, and social unrest, he inherited the family profession involving preparing the bodies of the deceased for burial according to the Islamic tradition as his ancestor. Since there are many dead bodies of the Iraqis during the war and his escaping from the war-torn Iraq seemed an impossible dream. The crisis of Iraqi war acted as the crucible that caused Jawad's identity to fracture, challenging his preconceived notion of self and forcing him to confront the contradiction and complexity inherited in his role as a copper worshiper. The war became a catalyst for his transformative journey as he navigated the destruction of his surroundings, the loss of the loved ones, the erosion of his cultural heritage. This experience exposed him to the harsh reality of the human suffering and provide the impetus for his quest for a renewed sense of purpose and identity. The second novel for analysis is Vicky Wang's Joan S.O.K. Vicky Wang, a Chinese-American female writer, is also the recipient of lots of literary prizes. Joan S.O.K. is her second novel set against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. Joan S.O.K. depicts the disaster and trauma faced by a Chinese-American family during the COVID-19. From first-person narrative point of view, the novel tells the story of Joan, a female Asian American in her 30s, struggling between Chinese-American culture and trying to find her position as an independent professional woman. As the lockdown and anti-Asia hostility brought by the pandemic intensified the surviving crisis and identity crisis of Chinese immigrants, she finally chose to devote herself to COVID-19 medical care by working as an ICU doctor. Joan's story offers a nuanced exploration of identity fracture and reestablishment within the context of the immigrants' experience facing the crisis of pandemic. The novel follows the journey of the protagonist, John, as he grappled with the challenge of the extreme racial discrimination and Asian hate during the COVID-19 pandemic. Trapped in this extreme crisis for the Chinese immigrants, he grappled with a feeling of isolation, longing for a sense of belonging, and pressure for conforming to American ideals, while simultaneously aiming to preserve her cultural heritage. Studying how the vulnerable in a crisis context and how their identity is fractured enable us to explore the psychological, emotional, and the social dimension of a fractured identity within the crisis context, uncovering how the relations the character have helped and hinder the establishment of the identity, shed light on the intricate process involved in reshaping and reconstructing one's sense of self. Next, I would like to talk about the conceptual framework and methodology. Crisis narrative delved into the complex dynamics of personal and collective identity. The vulnerable are the most affected group in the crisis. Thus, the identity fractured and identity reestablished will be reception of the vulnerable represented by the protagonist in the context of crisis depicted in the two crisis fiction will be analysis, which can be shown in the charted framework. To achieve the research objectives, I will employ a comparative analysis framework drawing on insight from literary criticism and culture study, as well as the identity theory. By examining the thematic elements and character development, we aim to uncover the commonality and difference in the process of identity reestablishment in different crisis narratives. According to Mandy Cooper's, identity is a primary issue in most radical and ethnic conflict as well as other conflict. Crisis contexts have the power to disrupt and redefine one's identity as individuals grapple with the challenge, losses, and uncertainty brought about by the crisis. Identity fracture referred to the process by which individuals' sense of self is shaped, influenced, and even transformed during the time of crisis. Fractured identity syndromes, according to the Young S, refer to as a small breakage of the personality, which is often not visible to the outside world. A fracture that can occur when the new story supplants the traditional notion of identity. Michael Foucault rejects the view of a person having an innate and fixed identity, and Mandy Cooper also states that the formation of identity is a process that continues throughout one's life. Moreover, Foucault identifies self as a continued discourse in a shifting communication of oneself to others. So, the relationship matter in identity formation or development, including the parental relation, family relation, friends or peers relation, intimate romantic relation, social relation, and social support relation with others, etc. Then I will continue by giving detailed comparative analysis of the two novels. The two crisis narratives are centered on the life of the protagonist, and they each use the first-person vantage point to show how the vulnerable face crisis. Jawad in the Cooper's version stands in for the average Iraqi who is exposed to days and horrific reality of the war and has to deal with the damage and bloodshed that has spread over the nation since Iraq was invaded and occupied by America. John in John is okay represent Chinese immigrants who are subject to extreme discrimination and exclusion and even violence during the COVID-19 pandemic in American society. Despite the fact that both novels feature the protagonist who goes through the severe identity crisis in face of the crisis circumstance, that both characters deal with the outside influence that shake up their pre-existing identity and prompt them to re-evaluate their value, aspiration, and a sense of self. The exact and concrete context of the two stories differ from one another, leaving the two protagonists dealing with two different type of crisis. In John is okay, the protagonist, a Chinese American young lady, experienced an identity crisis primarily as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, a natural crisis that caused an all-encompassing crisis for Chinese immigrants community in America. Jawad, a young man from a family of traditional corporate worship in Baghdad, struggling with the turbulent man-made crisis, the war crisis. As a result of this severe crisis, both of the two main protagonists experience severe personal hardship. For example, Jawad has to leave school and his beloved painting course since his brother was killed in the battle and his father passed away suddenly, while the United States were occupying Baghdad. The social structure to which he has previously belonged to is disrupted by the destruction of his city and the death of his beloved one. John's mother was compelled to remain in America according to the lockdown during the pandemic, and her father passed away from the disease. John was compelled to quit her employment, which served as his only outlet for releasing the tension he felt as he struggled to maintain her Chinese identity while still wanting to fit in with American culture. As a result, each of them experienced identity fracture to varying degree. Levels, the severity of their identity crisis and the sign of the symptom of the fractured identity are not the same. Jawad experienced unending nightmares, and his vivid hallucination nearly caused him to mistaken reality for his imagination. Even though he looked to his female companions for solace, relaxations, and purpose, since he feels hopeless and lost in life, he is unable to establish any stable, intimate relationship. Joan, who is continuously anxious, put her entire concentration to her work and appeared unconcerned about everything else. Despite her generosity and tolerance, as well as her attempt to allow others into her personal space, no one can meddle in her life or thought, and Joan is unable to build a deeper relationships. Moreover, the crisis setting and context also have an impact on how the protagonist in both novels establish his or her relationships, which greatly influence the re-establishment of their identity. The major relationship or conflict in corpus worship are the insurmountable conflict between Jawad and Iraqi and American soldiers. Additionally, Jawad's relationship with his clients, the deceased, and their relatives who are primarily other Iraqi as a corpus worship is also highlighted. Thus, Jawad struggle with the ethical ramification of his line of work and degradation of his culture and personal belief as he worked to rebuild his identity. As a contemplate the meaning and purpose of his own life in the face of such extreme pain, the brutality of the war amplified his existential crisis. He eventually came to terms with the fact that he was a corpus worship because Iraqis need to perform this rite to preserve their culture because the war has high death toll. However, he is powerless to influence how the war's problem is handled. Therefore, the identity re-establishment is sporadic and unstable. The fundamental conflict in Zhong is okay, despite the fact that Chinese immigrants are experiencing prejudice and persecution at time of the crisis. It's between the virus and people. During the pandemic crisis, the hostile interaction between the Chinese American, white, and other community are mostly transient. The main cause of the problem, to which a second generation of immigrants accustomed to, continue to be the cultural integration and preservation of her cultural heritage before the crisis. Additionally, Jones contracted with many patients from various communities throughout the crisis as an ICU doctor, aid in the restoration of Jones' reputation in public eyes, because he is rather crucial in the management of the pandemic problems. Of course, other relationships, especially relationships existing in private domain, also play a rather significant role in re-establishment of the protagonist's identity, which was not be analyzed in detail due to the limited time and space. In conclusion, the comparison of the corpus worship by Sinon Anton and Zhong is okay by Y.S.G.S. offer a conceptual understanding and a useful application for study of crisis narratives and identity re-establishment in literature. The protagonist crises differ greatly from one another. Joan's dilemma has its roots in the violence of the war and a crisis created by human, which expose him to the horror of days and test his sense of self. Joel's crisis, on the other hand, is mostly determined by difficult COVID-19, a natural crisis, which is a less significant and short-lived one. Furthermore, whereas in the story about crisis during the war, the weak and defenseless has no say in the outcome, this is not always the case in the story about crisis during the natural disasters. As a result, the likelihood and the scopes of identity restoration vary among the various crisis narrative types. This study adds to the body of knowledge on the crisis narrative and identity development. First of all, it deepens our comprehension of how people deal with identity crisis in various cultural and historical settings. We can identify common elements of human experience during the time of crisis by contrasting the work from various historical and special situations. This study emphasizes how literature serves as a vehicle for the representation and discussion of identity re-establishment during the time of crisis. We may examine the ability of literature to offer consolation, comprehension, and inspiration to people dealing with identity crisis by examining these two masterpieces. That's all for my presentation. Thank you for listening. Our next speaker is Wang He. Her title is Comparative Study of the Intrinsic Shared Value using the ethic philosophy in And the Earth Strong Deep and Medicine. Let's welcome her.
Well, thank you, Jianhua. And I was wondering, because at the very beginning, Yahui has internet connection. I think she's ready, so I don't know if she goes first or Yahui, are you there?
If Yahui is ready, then yes, can.
Yeah, yes, I'm ready. Yes, I can.
Okay, and sorry, excuse me a bit. And everyone, please feel free to post your questions and comments on our chat box, because this is more of a communication than just a simple presentation. Okay, thank you, everyone.
So can everyone see my PPT slides? Yeah. So thank you very much. So today my topic of this seminar is revolutionary sums of decolonization, a comparative study of the corpse washer in the Garden of Evening Mist. And first, I want every one of you contemplate on these two questions. So first one, how do you understand praxis communism? And second one, how can you describe the connection between decolonization and utopia? And in this topic, we'll discuss two different novels in the novelist. First introduction, Sainon Hamdoun. Sainon Hamdoun is a Iraqi poet, novelist, scholar, and literary translator. He has been described as one of the most acclaimed authors of the Arab world. He's associate professor at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study at New York University. And so you can see the movie on my PPT. So
no, it's not. It's still in the first page.
Okay, now how about this time? Okay.
Yes.
In his work, The Corpse Washer. The Corpse Washer is the episodic plot of the corpse of the story tells the story of Jawad's many relationships with teachers, family members, lovers, and friends, and how they one by one peered from his life by death, disappearance, exile, and until he's left at last alone with his tree and his corpses. And the next writer is Tan Wan In. Tan Wan In is a Malaysian novelist who writes in English. He published his first novel, The Gift of Rain, in 2007. He's best known for his 2012 book, The Garden of Evening Mist, which won the Man Asian Literary Prize and Walter Scott's Prize for Historical Fiction, and was shortlisted for Man Book Prize, making Tan the first Malaysian writer to be recognized by all three awards. In his work, The Garden of Evening Mist, the protagonist of the story, Tan Yuan-ning, was a Japanese prisoner of war during World War II, who ultimately rose to the position of war crimes judge. She ends up working as an apprentice to a Japanese governor in Cameron Highlands for several months during the Malaysian emergency in efforts to construct a garden in remembrance of her sister, who was imprisoned with her but did not survive. After the war, years after the events of the novel, she's still attempting to make sense of herself. The novel was adapted into a film starring Harishi Abi, Lee Xin-jia, John Henner, Davy Oakes, and Sylvia Chang, and was released in 2020. And this is the literal review of The Corpse Worship. We know the novel was written in 2013, and in 2015, Maswandi 2017 Hat Talk, and 2018-2020. We know there is a small climax about to 2020 to 2020, 2022. And this is the literal review of The Garden of Evening Mist. And the novel was finished in 2012, and the research climax was about 2018, 2017, and 2020. So let's look at the literature review of the first novel. We know Jose Yabra has mentioned the myth of the trauma hero, the triple subjunction of knowledge, of life. And in these articles, the writers mentioned the trauma history. And the second article, which was written by Yosef Abu in 2020, which analyzes how trees in the selected novels reflected in cultural values. And in 2020, Rajana Khanna has mentioned a PowerPoint presentation, the template, Lean, Creative, Simple, Unique. And we know in 2021, so Corpse Worship bears witness to the traumatic effects of the destinies from the perspective of the conquered. In his view, our wound is a result of the process whereby communism was eventually discarded as the alternative to capitalism. And this is our research gap. So researchers used textual analysis and references to trauma, colonialism, or communist theory to investigate these two novels, respectively. But there is no comparison of the similarities and divergence among them. The former study has not found the relationship between decolonization and praxis communism and their function in building national wellness. So our thesis statement is that, first, we investigate how colonization is portrayed in The Corpse Worship by Xin Liandong and Tan Wan In's The Garden of Evening Mist. And second, I will examine the many meanings of loyalty via a decolonial lens through a close reading of this writing. And lastly, analyzing praxis communism as a way of decolonization to combat political, social, and cultural oppression. And this is a conceptual framework of my topic. So first one, colonization. And we know people should be or exist in the colonized states. Then they will get the operation. And then this common state, this kind of state will arouse their national awareness. And this kind of awareness can be divided into cultural loyalty, national loyalty, and communist loyalty. Finally, by practicing communism, they will rise up and fight against the colonized states. That is what we call decolonization. And we have two phrases. First one is building beliefs of communism, and second one is building organizations. Then we have the text analysis. We use two characters in these two novels to make comparison. First one, Uncle Sabri in the corpse washer. And next one, Huan Hun in Garden of Evening Mist. And we are dividing this part into three parts. Background, colonization, the awakening of national wellness, and decolonization practices communism. So Fallon's argument. Fallon, as a famous psychologist, he has many arguments about decolonization and colonization. Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. In underdeveloped countries, the preceding generations have both resisted the work or erosion by colonialism and also helped on the maturing of the struggle of loyalty. So the context, the similarity of these two novels. So first one is the background. The corpse worship, the American colonization, war and occupation, destruction of infrastructure during the 1991 war. What had taken place, he said, was not just an occupation, but the destruction of a state more than 80 years ago.
You're not changing your slide. Your slide has completely disappeared from the screen.
Okay. So can you see the slides? Oh, how about now? Oh, yeah, we can see the pictures. No. So how about now?
I think you might have to stop sharing and share again.
Okay. Sorry. So how about now?
Yes.
Can you see my slides? Oh, yes. So last time we have stopped here. So here. So what had taken place, he said, was not just the occupation, but the destruction of a state more than 80 years old. War and occupation was the final blows, but the process had begun with the destruction of the infrastructure during the 1991 war. I don't know where our participants, there is any Iraqi students in it, because they have endured or experienced a series of struggles and blows in their country. Then there was the embargo, which had destroyed the social fabric. And now the void created by the occupation was being filled by these sectarian parties because they had institutions. Their rhetoric touched people's hearts, and they knew how to exploit the political climate. But my uncle added the history of secularism in Iraq runs deep. And he had ever mentioned the Americans hadn't supported Hitler. That's the way they had helped rebuild the Germany after the war with the Marshall Plan. And the Garden of Evening Mist also has the Japanese colonization. During the Japanese occupation, thousands of Chinese have gone to live at the fringes of the jungle. Doing their best to avoid any contact with the Kempentine, hoping not to run it out and massacred. The war had been over for 6 years. But those people had remained in their settlement, living off the land as a subsistence farmers. The Malaysian emergency ended in July 1960. 12 years after it began, with the combined efforts of local security forces, civilians, and troops from the Commonwealth. Malaya was one of the few countries in the world to defeat a communist insurgency. And the next part, the awakening of national awareness. So we divided into cultural loyalty, national loyalty, and the communist loyalty. Cultural loyalty. So my uncle Sabri, as ever mentioned, the history of secularism in Iraq was well known. That religious parties have no solutions to offer, just obscurantism. Islamic movements have also failed anyway in the Arab world. And the Dawa party, for example, was founded in Najaf. Because with the spread of communism, even in Najaf and the Kabbalah, people were confusing Shiite with Shiui, which terrified the religious clerics. The national loyalty. What he said was true, especially among the English educated straight Chinese, the King's Chinese, as we call ourselves. We have seen how the movement for independence had turned violence in India and Burma and the Dutch East Indies, and there were fears that similar kind of communal violence will also tear Malaya apart. Uncertain of how we would fare under the rule of the Malays, we preferred the British to run the country until Malaya was ready for independence. When that would be, no one was willing to say. The city's communist terrorists say they are fighting for independence too. I said, irony, isn't it? And Andrew nodded towards Temple. That's why he's keen for Malaya to be independent as soon as possible. It will be a fatal blow to the communists. Anyway, after the way we had abandoned you all to the Japanese, do we really still have any right to rule? So the communist loyalty. Fahad was a founder of the party, and he said he was executed by the monarchy and famously said right before being executed. Communism is stronger than death and higher than the gallows. You have to read Patatu's book on Iraqi. The communists used the supporters as the source of food and medicine, information, and the subscription money. The supporters were the Mingyue, the People's Movement, the Zhenshe Arab Brigaders. And decolonization, the praxis communism. Fanon and decolonization, praxis communism. Now, as Franz Fanon, a philosopher, psychiatrist from Martinique, focused on struggle of colonized people and the psychological impacts of colonialism, who emphasized the necessity of armed resistance and the need to actively dismantle colonial structures through praxis. So what's the difference between praxis communism and the previous communism? We know praxis communism is an evolution of traditional communism that emphasizes the importance of practical action and the involvement and the engagement in revolutionary struggle. So this approach emphasizes the need to bridge theory and practice, rejecting dogmatism and encouraging active participation in the transformation of society. As it emerged as response to the shortcomings and critics of traditional communist movements, it draws inspiration from various Marxist and non-Marxist thinkers who emphasized the significance of praxis, including Antonio Gracio, Rosa Luxemburg, the mass hegemony, and Franz Fanon, yes, the decolonization. So this is the praxis communism worldwide. And praxis communism, we know which aspects can embody the praxis communism. We said in two aspects. First one, building beliefs. My uncle asked him about the popularity of Marxist ideas in all Taiwan City after all these years, and the monk sounded optimistic and said his party had active sales and good numbers there, but that embargo had dealt a severe blow to political activism. Uncle Sabri in the Pop's Washer has once said that he was against the war and had demonstrated against it like millions in Germany and all of the world, but he never thought the Americans would be irresponsible and inept. And in the Garden of Enemies, Huang Hong and Ang Chung's elder brother has also joined the sub-regiment of Malay communist guerrillas or communist terrorists hiding in the jungles. And 3 years have passed since the Malayan Communist Party had launched its guerrilla war against the government, forcing the High Commissioner to declare a state of emergency. The world showed no signs of ending with the communist terrorists, which the government referred to as CTs, or more commonly bandits, keep up regular attacks on robber estates and tin mines. And the second step is to building organizations of the communists of their own. As Farhan was part of the party, and Tariq al-Shabi, the mouthpiece of the Communist Party, they heard and chatted for 50 minutes, and then Sabri came back with a copy. He told me that the man was a comrade whom he had seen in Beirut in 1982. There was announcements in big letters about major demonstrations 3 days to commemorate an anniversary of the 14th of July revolution. He called on all the party's friends and supporters to assemble in Liberation Square to march to Further Square. And my uncle asked me to drop him to the new headquarters of the Communist Party. I even saw a woman in her 60s applauding and dancing along. My uncle said she was a veteran communist who'd returned from exile in London. He knew her because of the articles she regularly published on leftist website. And differences between these two novels. So first one, different attitude towards the Communist Party and different attitude towards the comrade of the Communist Party. In the Corps worship, my uncle told him that he himself had left the Communist Party 8 years before because he was against its practices, dubious alliance, and new trajectory. Then he asked the young man where he was from. And in the Garden of Inner Mist, Huang Hong, as the member of the communists, has betrayed his belief and his party. A photograph of communist news article showed the bodies of the cities the police had shot, laid out in a row in a jungle clearing in front of a helicopter. Huang Hong had refused to reveal the money of the reward he had received when the journalists interviewed him. But the former political commissar of the Malayan Communist Party said that he would use the money to open the restaurant. And then we come to our conclusion. First, we must become convinced that colonialism is incapable of procuring for the colonized people the material conditions which might make them forget their concern for dignity. It is national liberation that leads the nation to play its part on the stage of history. It is at the heart of national wellness that internal consciousness lives and grows. And this is twofold emergence is ultimately the source of culture. We believe that a conscious and organized undertaking by a colonized people via praxis communism to re-establish the sovereignty of that nation constitutes the most complete and obvious culture manifestation that exists. And this is my presentation, and welcome your suggestions. And let's welcome our next presenter, Wang He. And whose title is A Comparative Study of Intrinsic Shared Values using Xunzi's ethnic philosophy in and the Earth Strength Deep and Medicine.
Okay, thank you, Yahui, for your introduction. So can anyone just see my screen? I think
not yet.
Okay, let me share again. So how about this time?
Yes.
Okay. So my topic and title is a comparative study of intrinsic shared values using Xunzi's philosophy in And the Earth Drank Deep and medicine. So first part is the introduction. Well, And the Earth Drank Deep, for which Niska Kota from Eswatini, Africa, has won the Commonwealth Short Story Prize 2022, tells a story about Hound, who achieved his goal through extreme violence of killing in a prehistoric village. The story is narrated in an instant, classic linear way of a realistic story. The ending is provocative, with many questions unfolding with the tension of conceit that promising young man could do such extreme deeds for his own goal is out of most readers' expectation and prediction, which also shines back at the real world. As chair of the judges said, like the best parables, the result is an interplay between story and reality, invention and the quotidian, the writer's imagination and the world of the readers. Well, Medicine is a Chinese short story written by Lu Xun, a leading writer, literary critic in modern Chinese literary history. The plot is the owner of a tea shop, Old Chuan, had purchased the medicine of a blood bomb made from an executed revolutionary Xia Yu to cure Little Chuan's illness of tuberculosis. Written in 1999, the story was published in 1922 as part of Cold Arms in May the 4th movement when China was invaded by Japan. Therefore, the theme of the story reveals the fatal weakness of the old democratic revolution, which is separated from the masses, shows the importance of awakening the people and making them get rid of the spiritual prison of the feudal class, and inspires people to seek a good medicine to cure China's sick society. Well, Cotter said, And the Earth Drank Deep is the first time in the history of a human species that cold blood flowed and the earth drank deep. Hence comes the title of the short story. So in the author's view, the Huns without name is new to the tribe, separated from other recognized identity in the community. The Hunt is not a psycho killer killing for fun, but just apathetic while achieving his goal of being a hunting hero. He didn't kill without reason. The prehistoric setting and the instinct of the hunt, being indifferent to others in complete his own objective, echo Chinese philosopher Xunzi's view of man's nature as evil by chance. The inborn human nature in Xunzi's perspective is impulse and irrespective of consciousness and feelings of others, and do things just what he or she wants to do without considering any responding consequences. And so Medicine, on the other hand, demonstrates how kind people like Chuan's family can do inhumanly deeds of eating bread soaked with human blood to meet their need of curing Little Chuan's illness. So therefore, through comparison and contrast of these two short stories, without direct external influences and connections, this paper seeks to discover the intrinsic shared value on human nature and differences between two different cultures and civilizations from Xunzi's philosophical perspective, in order to provide new lens of viewing and analyzing different literary works, rather than simply analyze of the work in one single culture or civilized system, as previously studying on these two stories ever did. Yes, so the research questions and research objectives as follows. So this paper is trying to answer the questions of why make these two short stories comparable and how to compare and contrast this, and also the conclusion that is the significance of making this comparison contrast. So the purpose is to identify, analyze, and reveal these evil rules through the methodology of text view analysis and content analysis. Okay, so next part is the analysis part. Xunzi, as one of the great educator and philosopher of the Confucian philosopher, offers more competitive and sophisticated defense of Confucianism against measures that man's nature is evil. Goodness is the result of conscious activity. What he means by evil is like a child who is impulsive and instinctive, and it is the way, in Chinese, Dao, with man's nature that as soon as he's born, he begins to depart from his original naivete and simplicity. Therefore, what Xunzi has emphasized is the significance of the learning after coming into this world, which is the way. Many Chinese philosophers have mentioned, but illustrated in different form. The way will make goodness out of human's evil nature, and goodness is the result of conscious activity. On the Earth Drunk Deep, the hunt is the newly arrived, who is separated from other knowledgeable people in the tribe. And the event occurs in the history of human emergence. I call Xunzi's concept of the evil nature of human without guidance of the way. Besides, the hunt is a typecast without name, who is not complete violent villain, but just behave with a sense of fierce egoism, regardless of other people's sensations and benefits. The instinct-driven actions is not without counterpart, even in modern society. Hence, interpreting and justifying this work in the lens of Xunzi's philosophy will illuminate human genetic diversity in different literature, culture, and civilization. Medicine is not the infant phase, but the consequence of lacking the way, which resulting into the states of fatuity and superstition, not in just the family, but community of people, as well as the whole society, at that specific Sino-Japanese war period. What lays behind this is the thoughtful deliberation on the reasons and the process of the formulation of this morbid social state, because if Cotter's works fictionalize the reality, Lu Xun's medicine can put this fiction into reality at that time. Xunzi's theory, to some extent, pierced through the ghastly phenomenon of taking human blood as the medical cure and manifest more deeper ethics and morality beneath the previous exterior study on this work. So by examining these two short stories, which both set as negative examples of human nature, yes, so this paper is trying to demonstrate how to interpret the negative protagonist with lacking of the way, and how to interpreting others' tragic results with some extent of getting or acquiring the way. And also, the way has been interpreted with three parts. The most important gist of it is the instructions of teachers or educated people, because the Chinese philosophers, especially for the Confucianism, they put education at the very top of becoming a man, or the growth of becoming a man. And also the ritual principles, which might be elaborated after this seminar, because education is on the most foreground of this introductory seminar presentation, and the rituals will be further developed further afterwards, because both these ritual principles get involved with the whole community, and with the community of hierarchy is more complicated than this. And also conscious effort, that is also makes us difference of the results in the story, for example, on the Earth Drank Deep, because different protagonists or characters have their own will-powered action. Okay, so the most important concept in Xunzi's philosophy is the way, Dao, as I've mentioned previously. This is one of the most common terms of Chinese philosophy, though all thinkers define it somewhat differently, though the term originally referred to road or path, it became extended to a way of doing things, a way of acting, or as it was used in philosophy, the right way to live. In Xunzi's case, He means the human way, the way of good government and the proper way of behaving, not the way of heaven or nature as Lao Tzu or Zhuangzi define it. And as Mencius often suggests, in fact, Xunzi is notable for having probably the most rationalistic view of heaven and the supernatural in the early period. In Coulter's story, the hunter is the most obvious protagonist who hasn't got the way. He's the only newcomer in the tribe in the very beginning of the human species, like right at the emergence of Homo sapiens, and has the only purpose of winning people's admiration and reverence from others, irrespective of others' feelings and existence. What he behaves simply according to his own instinct to achieve his goal without hesitation of resorting to violence. The subconscious motivation of taking advantage of people surrounding him to get attention of him is just like the newborn baby's playful tricks of being constantly concerned from others. This instinctively inborn evil nature as doing things without consciousness and conscience, lacks of morality and action without education, which is the way he hasn't acquired. And on the contrary, there are other people like Zungu, as the picture shows, Niafi and Mubu, who have shown great generosity to receive the hunt as the newcomer among the tribe, and they interpret his action in a generous way, forgivable to his wrong action, attributing to being young or being afraid. The reason for their conscious benevolence is because they have acquired some parts of the way. But why the people of the way who acquire the way has the bad results, as in Coulter's story as well as in the medicine? Well, actually, it's because Junzi claims that the way was first pointed out by particularly wise and gifted people he called sages. A common term for the exemplar in early Chinese thought. I think I'll skip one PPT. The sage, there are three stages of progress in study: the scholar, the gentleman, and the sage. Though sometimes the sage and the gentleman seems to be equivalent for him, they were all terms in common use in philosophical discourse of the time, especially in Confucian thought. But Xunzi gives them a unique twist. He describes the achievements of each stage slightly different in several places, but what he seems to mean is that a scholar is someone who has taken the first step of wishing to study the way of the ancient sages and adopts them as the model for correct conduct. The gentleman has acquired a good deal of learning, but still must think about what the right thing to do is in a situation. And the sage has wholly, actually, the sage has wholly internalized the principles of ritual and morality so that his action flows spontaneously without the need to forethought, yet never goes beyond the bounds of what is proper. Coulter's characters, other than the hunt, belong the first and second stage, as they have followed the tribe rules to behave, and they are fairly skilled, but still can't make decisive and appropriate study plan for the hunt. The sage is the one with perfect technique of dealing with people and things with his own style and unique interpretation of the society, like Xunzi's teacher Confucius, who can make unique particular study plan for different students respectively. The sages are so accomplishing all without ever consciously thinking about what is to be done on second thought, but know exactly what to impart knowledge and morality for each and different students. So that's why even Zungu Nathi, one of them is tribe leader, still can't be the sage, make decisive, immediate judgment was the hunt's action and how to make a sort of study plan or make this newcomer of their tribe to make a proper growth according to their schedule. And also which results into their own tragic ending by killing, by this sort of stayed in the sort of crude stage of study way of the hunt. And also, in another story, the medicine is another negative example of people who did not acquire the way, but they were going a more extreme state of being superstitious, as they have deeply believed what has been said, that human blood could cure any illness of people because they have never been educated. To be exact, there are totally illiterate community at that particular time of Sino-Japanese War. They don't have any consciousness of proper activity and behavior, let alone the judgment of what is right and wrong. Not only they didn't get the way, but running against the way. So also in Chinese, there is the saying, if you get the way, you get the moral support from many, vice versa, no support. And that comes the hunt and the trans family. And also stand on the other side, or the other pole of this story, is Xia Yu, actually whose prototype is the revolutionist of Qiu Jin in the May 4th movement, who shed blood for the Chinese people, and also trying to make awareness of the patriotic feelings of Chinese people at that time. But he just do it in vain. Actually, just like the other, members, as I have mentioned in And the Earth Drank Deep, she has acquired the way as revolutionist in the Sino-Japanese War period, but still, he still not think of the condition and situation of the whole community, that is rather sort of, it can't be sort of naive and illiterate and can't have their own judgment and consciousness at that time. So both these figures can be termed, I think, defined as in the previous preliminary two period as scholars and gentlemen. They're both educated people. In the tribe, they have their own experience and about hunting and living, a state of living. And in the Sino-Japanese War period, of course, students, educated people. And also there's community of hierarchy, although they sat in different conditions, they still connected with the whole community's benefit. And also they have their own action, whether by dealing with the Han's issue and also by shed blood as revolutionists against the Sino-Japanese War. But they haven't acquired the way to the extent as Confucius or other sages has done. So that's why they have come to their final tragic results. So actually, to sum up, actually this way can be understood as a sort of like, in the Bible, there's birthmark by God, the original sin. But actually, this inborn evil nature is not what Xunzi has emphasized. The most important thing is about the after the inborn evil phase comes to the man of growth acquired by this man-made success through hard work, education, and ritual. So between East and West, like these two short stories, their similarities and differences, they both served and also raises question about about the sinful nature of humanity. And also they're rather different, just like these two cultures. By the Bible, although there's the American dream, and also, yes, in the foreground of the American dream, that is Puritanism, it's said through this some through limited atonement, they could make atonement of their original sin. And also this zhuangzi also make some proclamation on put some emphasis on education and rituals. They could still sort of through their own hard work to go through the three phases of becoming a scholar into growing into the sage period. They could become successful and make their own life reasonable, decisive, and meaningful. They have rather, although they're rooted in different culture and civilization, but they share these intrinsic values in this human nature quality. But also there's some differentiations between this, whatever in different culture, civilization, or historical context. But why I have made this or do this research study, because through the lens of comparative study on literary works from different culture and civilization, we can find there are the intrinsic values on viewing and justifying the human nature, which discovers quality or state of being of a similar ethic, or tending to unifying a structural composition, which is usually called homogeneity, which is I have borrowed from this cultural concept. So the quality or the state of being homogeneous. However, the homogeneity here is rather different to the concept of the cultural homogenization refers to the idea that different cultures transform and become more similar to each other as globalization progresses. So literary homogeneity here is the tendency of finding the intrinsic value of human nature between East and West for better understanding, while preserving the innate and inherent national quality, which is unique and differentiated from other cultures. That is the literal heterogeneity. The concept is rather similar to Chinese premier Zhou Enlai once has proposed in politics, 求同存异, that means seek common ground while reserving differences. So the study has a clear limitation of lack of pre-study academic background, as Niche Carter's prize-winning story and The Earth Drank Deep is to be known quite recent, and comparison of these two works is rather regional. There is more detailed study on cultural symbols of the hunted animals and the blood-dipped bread, as well as the numbers in both cultures to be developed and completed. So therefore, I hope this introductory comparative study between these two works will invite more similar academic interests and researchers in this field. Besides, the differentiated culture-based interpretation of human nature needs to be expanded and deepened to make this study more systematic and integrated. Okay, so that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for Wang He's presentation. And there is a question for you. In the chat board, how to differentiate Xunzi's concept of human nature is evil and Confucius' idea of human is inborn good.
Okay, thank you for Yahui's. I really sorry, I haven't spot the question, but thank you for reading it out loud. Yes, so there's constant debate about Menshe's idea of men is born to be good, and also Xunzi's idea of men is born to be evil. What I want to offer the suggestions of differentiating these two concepts is to understand first, what is the goodness Mencius has referred to and the evil that Xunzi has emphasized. because they're not what we are supposed to define in our common sense. So Mencius is that actually man was born inbornly good, and also through education, they should keep this good natured, and through education and everything. Xunzi actually have the similar idea, put emphasis on the education, but she thought man was born to be evil, and that evil is not to, like, and the earth drank deep in the story, the hunt, is just a, you know, a villain to kill for no reason, just for fun. So evil in Xunzi's idea is just like the inborn, the newly born baby. So as you can recall in your daily life, so the baby actually, so in the public area, they just, you know, always screaming, crying, and asking for things without, you know, consciousness of other people surrounding him or her. So what he is screaming or being irritated is just you know, want to get what he or she need. And that sort of, although it's not rather accurate comparable metaphor, inborn baby just like some sort of smart animals, because they just follow their instinct of achieving their own goal. So that is why the hunt, actually, he is killing not for fun, but just to achieve his own purpose of being this admiring hero among this tribe. So that's why he killed someone who, you know, maybe smear his reputation, and killed even the tribe leader. So they don't have this sympathy or have this conscious of doing his own activity, but to follow his or her his own instinct by achieving his own goal, what he wants to achieve. So that is what Xunzi has emphasized. But do you think this hunt is really evil? You know, to the bone, cannot be altered or changed in the future? I don't think so. So if he has, you know, killed this someone who has blocked his way, I think there's no suspense. He might be one day be a tribe leader. And at that time, I don't think he would tolerate others do the same deed as he did. He wants to, you know, rule this whole community. I think that involves more of the rituals of Xunzi's and about the politics, educate how, you know, this educator concept spread into the whole community, into how make this community become stable and prosperous. So what I could predict is through learning, through education, through after what he has acquired by killing for this hunt, he would one day become a leader, and he might. I'm not sure whether he could achieve the phases or stages of become a sage, but he could be, might be an excellent leader through this, you know, the next experiences after that event. Okay, I hope that answers your question. I think there's a question for Yahui.
And
What is the difference between traditional communism and praxis communism? Okay, Yahui.
Yeah. Okay, now, so we know the communism can be subdivided into Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, and etc. Well, the traditional communism is built on Karl Marx and Engels. It is a materialist interpretation of historic development, better known as historical materialism. And to understand social class relations and social conflict in a dialectical perspective, to view social transformation It originates from the works of the 19th century German philosophers such as Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And Leninism is a political ideology developed by Russian Marxist revolutionary Vladimir Lenin that proposes the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat. So we know Lenin, Stalin, and etc. They are the dictator. Maoism. And so Maoism is the key difference between Maoism and other forms of Marxism, Leninism is that patents should be the bulwark of the revolutionary energy, which is led by the working class. There are three common values provided by Chairman Mao. That is revolutionary populism, being practical, and dialectics. So as an evolution of traditional communism, the praxis communism emphasizes the importance of practical action and the engagement in revolutionary struggle. We know the colonial revolution as a plebeian uprising, the liberating conflict against the cruel and state colonial rule, paving the way for non-capitalist development with some Soviet Union help. We know Chairman Mao Zedong independently came up with a similar concept in the 1930s, and he described the Chinese colonial movement as a protracted war of liberation and enumerated the circumstances in which success was feasible. So anti-racist praxis, as one kind of praxis communism, is absolutely devoted to forming allies and solidarities in order to fight against racist and class oppression. And secondly, since after the study of the practitioners' ethical obligations, so Francis Fallon formed similar views of the colonial revolution in the context of his own combat experience in Algeria. So I truly believe praxis communism is a way for most of our countries, even for Iraq, I'm sorry. Thank you. This is my answer. And there's also a question for Cai Hong. Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, I have got the question from Zhou Jianhua. Firstly, thank you for your question. Let me correct a little. The war context makes a happy ending impossible rather than makes the socialization impossible. As the happy ending is reflected in two aspects, including a marriage and social fulfillment. But every Bildungsroman is about the individual's socialization. As socialization actually is people's stepping into the society and their interaction with the society. It means that when you step into the society, you begin your socialization. As to whether the gender of the writers influence the ending of the novel, I think this is also the reason. I think I should take it into consideration, but I think the main reason is the social context. As I have shown the evidence, Sina Anton actually connect the impossibility of getting married with the war context. For example, the cancer that led to Rain's disappearance is caused by the weapons used in the war. So why is not other reasons that lead to the impossibility of getting married. I think Sina Anton actually arranged this reason intentionally.
What is the classical built woman term?
Yeah, so thank you for your question. It reminds me that yeah, that probably gender is also a reason. I haven't solved this before. Thank you, Xianhua.
Thank you for your answer. I got a lot. Thank you very much.
Another question for me.
Built woman.
I have got it. Read it first. What is the classical Bildungsroman called? That can be universally in different contexts as American and okay. Thank you for your question. A classical Bildungsroman, what is considered classical could also be regarded as classical in another context. According to the theories of Bildungsroman, actually, especially Moratti, Franco Moratti, actually he divide Bildungsroman into two kinds. The first one is classical. Is classical, represented by some of the German novels, German Bildungsroman, and some of the British ones. Just examples are Willing Master by Goddard, or David Copperfield or Jane Eyre, or some other Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, and so on. But actually, as time passes by, and then the social context actually have influence in Bildungsroman, then actual Bildungsroman will also change. So we also have non-Bildungsroman, non-classical Bildungsroman. So what is the difference between these two is that according to these theories, is the happy ending, the social fulfillment, and the marriage. But actually, a lot of critics think that modern Bildungsroman usually have open endings. We can have open endings. Because the social context actually influenced this. For example, colonialism and the war and some other things influenced this. So nowadays, actually, many Bildungsroman are non-classical Bildungsroman, but as I have noticed that in Chinese American literature, I found that a lot of writers actually also write this kind of novels with very happy endings. I think they do this intentionally to express a kind of wish that they can be accepted by the majority of the society, even though they didn't arrange a marriage. They also arrange a symbolic one, and also the result is always the being accepted by the mainstream society. So I think it can also be It can also be used in other contexts. Other context, yeah. Other culture. Oh, okay. A question for Jianhua.
Okay, thank you for the questions. For the reason why I choose this two story to analyze the identity formation, I think that because during the crisis narratives, when the protagonist facing extreme crisis, and then their sense of self, I mean their identity, might facing being will come to a state of the we would say identity fracture. I use identity fracture, not identity crisis, because I think that they have already established their identity to some extent, and then suddenly, and because of this crisis situation or context, and their identity, the previous ones, fractured. So so I both of this novel and discuss about two extreme crisis, though they are different genre, a different kind of crisis, but it's quite extreme. The one is a war, and the other is a pandemic. Okay, widespread virus, I think. So so that's because of that, I would choose exactly the identity fracture and how they deal with that, the identity reestablishment in this between these two stories. That's all.
And welcome any questions from our participant. You can use your microphone to provide us any questions. Is there any question? You can also type your question on the chat board. And questions can be provided to any of us as Wang He, Jianhua, Yang and Caihong. So if there's no questions, thank you for all of your participation. And this is a good opportunity for all of us to exchange our opinions and minds and welcome more such meetings occasions for more communication. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.